This is the last episode of the podcast series focusing on electric vehicle market in Cambodia. As the electric vehicle market continues to grow, the concerns regarding environmental impact of EV battery disposal have drawn attention to the emerging field of battery recycling. During a recent panel discussion at the Battery Show North America, titled Overcoming Hurdles in Advanced Battery Recycling, industry experts offered valuable insight into the future of this critical sector. Recycling a lithium battery is technically feasible and commercially viable. Given the many benefits it offers, as a more development happens in the sector and companies enter the battery recycling space, a diverse range of facilities and capabilities will emerge. With the industry's growth, different supply chain and customers will have varying needs, some requiring advanced materials and the others opting for more traditional commodities. The evolving market is set to accommodate diverse recycling capabilities and technologies to meet the demand for returning these critical materials to the supply chain at various points. As technology advances, the batteries are becoming more energy dense and volumetrically efficient. Incorporating improved thermal management system, this complexity is further accentuated as we shift towards cell-to-pack technology, where the batteries become an integral part of the vehicle. Companies that have the highest performance recycling technologies can recover even more of elements and lower the costs. In this episode, we will discuss the growth potential of recycling industry in Cambodia. We will explore the incentives, market trends, and what to look forward to in this sector. Let us join the panelists and discuss. Come along. Hi everyone. Hi, how are you, Andy? Hi, Cecile, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
Welcome back to the fourth and the last episode of the 4-episode podcast on electric vehicle investments in Cambodia. This episode is particularly important because this is the very basis why EV has gained traction. In this episode, we are going to discuss the environmental aspects of EV industry and regulations around recycling investments. I'm joined with the same set of friends who have been with us for the past 3 episodes. And in particular, welcome back, Cecile. You had to go for something for the 3rd episode and now you're back. So, and we actually look forward to hearing you at length in this episode of our podcast. So with that, let me refresh as to what we have discussed in last 3 episodes. The first episode being the market entry into assembly units and spare part manufacturing factories. The second one was with respect to the charging station and the other EV infrastructure, which would enable and make the demand robust. The third was the downstream being the showrooms and regulations, tax incentives and market realities around showrooms in Cambodia. And now the third one being environmental and recycling related industries and regulations and tax and market realities around it is what we'll discuss. So with that introduction, Simon, Let me put you on the spot. Let me ask you the opening question for this episode. My question to you would be to, not with much of an expanse, but briefly at least, explain what sort of environmental clearance would be required. And I'll go in three series of questions to you. The first one here being assembly units and spare part industry.
Okay, well, obviously a very important aspect of electric vehicles and particularly establishing an electric vehicle industry in a country, in an economy. What kind of clearances are needed? The law has recently changed. In 2023, the Code on Environment and Natural Resources came in. And this has specifically replaced some specific laws and any laws, as with many other Cambodian bodies of legislation. Anything that is contrary to it is abrogated, which means it doesn't count. So it's kind of a catch-all. But let's start with the assembly plants and spare parts industry. You're going to need, at a minimum, an environmental impact assessment, an EIA. And the Code on Environmental Natural Resources, I'm going to abbreviate it to CODE, if that's okay. And that has to evaluate the potential environmental impacts of a project and propose measures to mitigate those impacts. A company can't do it by itself. You have to get a licensed provider to perform this. And this is submitted to the Ministry of Environment, MOE, for approval. You may need an environmental management plan. You will likely need an EMP. And this will outline how the company is going to manage environmental risks during the construction and operation of assembly plants. And it may involve annual fees if you're going to enter into an EPA, an environmental protection agreement. Again, which is likely. And I think for all the three scenarios, these are going to be the baseline standards that you need to consider.
Thank you, Simon. And so you did discuss about the EIA, Environmental Impact Assessment, and EMP, and you mentioned that there are certain service providers who are licensed. Is there a list which the ministry publishes for, say, a foreign investor looking into an assembly unit business here, can simply reference and reach out to them to help them with, say, the environmental impact assessment submissions with the government, the management plan and approval of it, in particular to get to the stage of environmental compliance certificate?
As you say, I think liaison initially with the Ministry of Environment is going to be important. They have a list of licensed providers. At the moment, it's only Cambodian companies that are licensed by the Ministry of Environment that can provide this service, can provide the environmental impact assessment. And the code, of course, which came in 2023, that derogates from the previous legislation. It makes a distinction between an initial environmental impact assessment, depending on the project, or a full environmental impact assessment. And perhaps we'll come on to that a bit later, particularly when it comes to recycling batteries. Of course, because there are so many concerns when it comes to recycling batteries, a full environmental impact assessment is going to be required. For things that for showrooms perhaps you might not need, or at most you may need an initial environmental impact assessment.
Basically.
Correct, yes.
Okay. Now that actually were the two questions which was going to actually ask you. Particularly the regulations around when we are looking at, say, a charging station, and then again the recycling business. I'm not including the showroom side of because it might not be very relevant from an environmental clearance perspective, but at least from say their charging station and the recycling business, what are the environmental compliances which an investor needs to keep in mind?
I think they're two good examples of both ends of the spectrum. For a charging business or smaller scale projects, they may only require an initial environmental impact examination or IE assessment. And that's a preliminary assessment to determine if a full EIA is going to be required. If so, then of course, that follows on. But charging stations is a good example of something that may have to comply with only an initial environmental impact assessment. On the other end of the spectrum, of course, when it comes to recycling businesses, for electric vehicle batteries, Andy will speak to this, and we can see some of the byproducts here. You're going to likely need a full environmental impact assessment from the Ministry of the Environment. You're going to need to consider a comprehensive hazardous waste management plan. And so after the environmental impact assessment is approved, you get given, I think we spoke about, an environmental compliance certificate from the MOE, and this certifies that all regulatory requirements are met, and there are annual compliance requirements that you need to comply with.
So if I can summarize that as far as process is concerned, and please feel free to chip in. So the first scope would be scoping of the project as to what kind of compliance you need to be factoring. That is either in initial environmental assessment or EIA, that is environmental impact assessment, which is a more detailed process. And the second would be conducting that assessment. The third would be submissions for review to the ministry, which would include the report and then at the same time the plan. Penultimate requirement would be, and I want your confirmation on that, if there is a public consultation around this necessary as per the process, and then obviously last would be approval and compliance. So could you please give a bit more insight on if I've missed anything from a compliance perspective, particularly if you could give emphasis on public consultation?
I think it's not a direct answer to that question, given that the code is very new. Liaison with the Ministry of the Environment, I think, is the key takeaway with this. The code introduces a number of factors, but there are still a great number of requirements that need implementing regulations. So I think the key takeaway for this is liaison with the Ministry of Environment is going to be essential, particularly as this code is introduced and implementing regulations are introduced.
Thank you. And would you say that these consultations should start early on in your investment milestone, given the time it may take? And
at the outset.
Thank you. That's a good takeaway, that the discussion with the stakeholder, the relevant ministry to get your environmental clearance should be one of the initial processes to undertake. And that actually chimes into what I'm going to ask you, Cecil, especially given your expertise around the sector, the area we are discussing. And my question to you would be, what are some of the considerations from environmental and safety perspective which are necessary to understand with respect to two aspects: charging stations and recycling business?
Okay, thank you very much, Nishant. So when starting to develop EV infrastructure in Cambodia, it's really essential to address, as you mentioned, both the environmental and the fire safety to ensure sustainability and security of this project. So I'll start with charging station. For charging station, regarding the environmental considerations, so bit of background, EVs offer significant environmental benefits over internal combustion engine vehicles by reducing operational emissions. By 2030, to give some numbers, EVs in Cambodia are projected to avoid a bit more than 100,000 tons of CO2 equivalent annually, potentially rising to 2.2 million tons by 2050. As Cambodia integrates the 70% renewable energy into its grid by 2030, which was announced earlier this year, these benefits will even more increase, making EV a cleaner option, as we were mentioning in previous episodes. One thing that is important to understand is while EV lower emission during use, their manufacturing, especially battery production, has a higher initial carbon footprint. When we talk about lithium-ion battery production, it involves quite energy-intensive processes like mining and refining materials such as lithium, cobalt, and nickel. But when we do a life cycle assessment, with an energy grid mix that is okay, these emissions are generally offset over the vehicle lifetime due to lower operational emissions compared to ICVs. So this is why it really underscores the importance of integrated renewable energy into the grid powering EV charging station, as we were mentioning this morning. Regarding fire safety consideration, ensuring the safety of EV charging station is crucial to prevent electrical fires and protect users. I'll just give a couple of standards and example to get a little bit more in detail. So charging station must absolutely use high quality components and comply with very strict safety standards, such as IEC 61851 or for EV conductive charging system, for example, or IEC 6364 for electrical installation. One thing that is absolutely critical for Cambodia, and I'll detail this a little bit more, is proper grounding. Proper grounding is vital to avoid faults that could lead to fires. And this is very important for all home and office charging infrastructure, because as you might have experienced, not all of them are properly grounded, and that's a very big worry. So before actually allowing home charging, there should be a really large-scale study just to validate
the standards.
And if there are upgrades that are required for especially four-wheelers charging.
Let me stop you there a bit, Cecile, and just for our audience who may not understand what you mean by proper grounding, could you explain that a bit?
Okay. So basically, when you do an electrical installation system, you need to have a safety measure when you have voltage sources that enable you to connect to the ground currently, so that when you have an electrical current, it will, if instead of going to you, it will go to the ground.
Okay, so earthing.
Earthing, exactly, earthing.
Great.
The second aspect after earthing, another aspect that is quite important for fast charging station is the importance of including advanced thermal management system to regulate battery temperatures. Indeed, rapid charging can increase the risk of thermal runaway. What do we call a thermal runaway? It's basically when you have a battery that overheats uncontrollably, potentially leading to fire. So that's a second aspect of fast charging station that is absolutely mandatory. The third element, which is mandatory, is fire suppression system designed specifically for electrical fires. They should be installed at the fast charging installation. Rapidly, I'll touch upon two more aspects which are linked to safety. The first one is the emergency access and response. Because you have such risk, it's very important that charging stations provide easy access for emergency services with very clear signage for emergency shut-off points and proper lighting. First responders need also training to handle fire involving high voltage equipment like EV batteries. The station should also allow quick access for emergency vehicle, reducing response times during incidents. This might seem normal, but when we see how a lot of projects are being designed here, it's not often that fire safety is included directly in the design. So it's really important to take this into consideration because there are more risk of fire happening. The last element I'll touch upon, still linked to these safety standards, it's interoperability and safety standards. So all components of an EV charging infrastructure must be interoperable and comply with international safety standards. For instance, ISO 15118 ensures secure communication between the EV and the charging station. And this is absolutely critical for the safe operation. So for this to be kept over the long run and the duration of our lifespan of the installation, you need to have regular maintenance, like always. But again, this is not always something that happens. And you need to update the charging equipment to meet evolving safety standards and address potential vulnerabilities. Again, this is an environment that is evolving quite rapidly.
Certainly.
And keeping updated with the standards is something that is going to be a very strong challenge here. So that would be for charging station. Now let me move same topics, but for the recycling business. So first, the environmental consideration. As EV adoption increases, the demand for lithium-ion batteries, so I'll just call them LIBs, will rise significantly. We'll start up to 620 megawatt hour per year by 2030, potentially over 9 gigawatt hour per year by 2050. So that's a huge increase. Initially, those batteries that will be decommissioned, they will be able to be repurposed for secondary use, like grid stabilization, for example. So basically what it means that you have a battery that has lost like 80% of its capacity, but you don't throw it away straight away. You are able to use it for other type of purposes, like grid stabilization. So that's the kind of second life. And once they have like lived their second life, then you go for recycling.
So bringing in a second life in between the first usage and the recycling to make it longer.
Make it longer, and because you don't have the same requirements if you are using your car, for which you want the battery to hold, charge, or something that is just as a backup or something like that.
I will explain the more detail about the battery life cycle. So generally, when we use the transportations using the batteries, we call it the SOH, the state of health. So batteries under the 80% cannot use for the vehicle purposes because efficiency is low. So 80% to the 60% that we can use, as Cecile mentioned it, we can use the other purposes as battery reuse, some kind of the ESS. So under the 60%, also the cannot use anymore as a kind of ESS method. So at that times, we can consider battery recycle.
Certainly, and I will come to you, Andy, particularly. I would like you to demonstrate what we have on our table since the last 3 episodes. So I'll come back to you, particularly because Verywell has a recycling unit back in Korea, and it is being brought to use for business in Cambodia. Back to you, Cecil. So you were talking about the second life of a battery before it's administered to a completely breakdown and recycling process.
So again, and I like numbers, so I'll just continue with a few numbers. By 2040, we are only talking about hundreds of megawatt hours of batteries that will need decommissioning annually. But this will drastically increase after from 2040 to 2050. So that means that we do have time to get prepared in the country, but we need to put in place a very strong system to be able to manage this second life and recycling batteries that will come as the year passes. Continuing on that topic, so proper disposal of this battery is absolutely mandatory due to the hazardous materials that they contain and that Andy will explain, showing us concretely. These materials must be managed very carefully to prevent environmental contamination. Given the complexity of this lead battery recycling, Cambodia will most likely need to develop international partnerships to handle these volumes sustainably and ensure responsible processing of end-of-life batteries. So again, as what you're developing, Andy. Two more things, and then I'll give the floor. So moving on to fire safety consideration. So the lead recycling process carries, again, significant fire risk, particularly during the dismantling and processing. These batteries are compact and contain flammable material, making them, of course, prone to fires if not handled correctly. That means that recycling facilities must implement strict safety protocols, including temperature control, continuous monitoring for sign of damage, and advanced fire detection system. Fire suppression system, as mentioned previously, for electrical fires are essential, as traditional methods, and this is important, might not be effective. So it's really important to have the appropriate fire suppression system for this kind of flammable material. And one aspect that is, again, important is that workers must be thoroughly trained in fire safety procedure and emergency response protocol to ensure their safety, but also the safety of the environment. And again, worker training is not something that is always available. Last one?
Yes.
Okay. and then I'll give the floor.
It's very interesting. We would like you to go on because there are too many details there, and our audience really benefit from it. Go ahead.
So I'll just give a few for the audience, a few name of relevant standards that might be looked into when looking as a recycling business. So we usually talk about ISO 14001, which provide guidelines for environmental management, IEC 62619 that outlines safety requirements for lithium cells and batteries, and the last one, ISO 45001, which focuses on occupational health and safety management. That's it. Thank you very much for your patience, and I hope it will be useful.
No, this has been interesting, and it's actually a very compact. It's a loaded, statement from you with so much of detail, which certainly will benefit our clients. And before I come to you, Andy, on the processes and all those demonstrations, which I was intrigued, I must state, when I heard you speak about them and with the passion you've spoken. Before I come to you, I'll come to you, Diver, just for the change of the scenario. And my question to you would be, what are the tax implications of disposing of or recycling EV batteries and similar scrap used in EVs? What are the incentives from an investment perspective for factories that operate recycling and disposable processes with focus on EV?
Okay. So first on the tax implication on the recycling and the disposal. So currently, Cambodia does not have any clear guidelines on the implication of disposal or recycling of EV products. So the general rule would be if there is no specifically mentioned, then for recycling, our understanding is it will still form part of the operations of the company. So it would only have tax implication once it is resold or considered,
Okay.
for selling. But for disposal of the EV, uh, the question for tax is documentation on how disposal would work. Now, for the investment incentives, the existing investment law and the tax rules don't specify any specific incentives.
Let me interject there, Tiger, and I would want to question you before you complete
Okay.
further. Is what about the incentives for green tech? Wouldn't this qualify under that?
So for green tech, so first on the investment incentive, so the LOI is not clear whether recycling and disposal would qualify, but it possibly can be considered under the green technology sector. But unless we need further clarity from the government on this aspect or on this type of investment, whether this would really form part of the investment that can be considered a QIP. Now, for Cambodia does not currently offer specific incentive for factories involved in recycling and disposal. And also, Cambodia does not have any carbon related or environmental tax mechanism in place. There's no fees or taxes applicable on disposal of hazardous materials, including EV batteries. And currently, there's also no tax credit or incentive available for recycling of EV batteries. So I think these are among the areas that can be considered as an area of opportunity for the government to introduce.
Yes. So basically, we are saying that while there is a bit of gap from tax policy perspective, it is also an opportunity for investors to work with the government and showcase the international best standards to form incentives
Yes,
for
that's
people.
exactly right.
And it's interesting because why I raised the component or the question around green tech actually stems from my discussion with Andy. And trust you me, if you look at that video, which we can't really showcase here, there is a lot of technology involved in that process. So with that, actually, I will go to Andy and Cecil, please chime in when you see the need of it. And Andy, to you, the question would be, what economic benefits can Cambodia gain from developing a robust EV recycling industry? What are the main challenges that you foresee for EV recycling industry in Cambodia, and what are the mitigations? And while you're talking about it, let's finally make use of these props here.
Yes, as the divers mentioned, it's till now the Cambodia government doesn't have any the guideline or regulations about the battery recycle from the electric vehicle. So that's why also yes, as I mentioned, we are under preparing the battery recycling the project, but the governments already know about our project, the ideas. Yes, but we hope to get some kind of the official process for the certificate or any accreditations for the Cambodia government, but still there is no specific guideline or the approval process. Even so, we bring up this project idea to the ministry, but Very World's project is a first one.
Yeah, maybe Andy, if I can jump here. For me, we are at the same stage as when discussion started on EV. Discussion started on EV. We started looking at charging infrastructure, but there was nothing. And for me, for battery, we are at this stage. For now, we are on charging station and EV uptake. And this is a completely new topic about recycling in general in Cambodia, but especially e-waste or EV. So it's really something that at some point we'll need to get started.
And it goes to the very soul of the environmental consideration why EV has taken shape. So, Eddie, please continue.
The MOE departments of the waste management, they know about this one is very critical, the issues for the incoming the few years later. So actually I discussed with them from the 2021. So the once we the preparing the e-mobility project with KOICA, because with KOICA we suggested the project ideas including the electric scooter assembly factory and waste battery recycle. So with local the market research, so we found it many the problems because there is no some kind of the specific regulation of the waste of battery management. So in here, yes, on the road, there is lots of the second-hand hybrid car, Toyota Prius. So most of them is imported from Europe or the US, so over the 10 years, right? So yes, hybrid car is they use the gasoline engine and electric motor together. But there's most of them is imported as second-hand car is over the 10 years, so the battery is actually almost end of cycle, life cycle. So when we research and interviewed with local garage, they just change it because it's really difficult to repair the battery, the cell. So they just change it new one or the old one can work it, just throw away with solid waste. So also I visited the Dangao, the waste dump areas. They just land pit with the solid waste.
Goes to the landfill, basically.
Yes. So nobody, because that is 3 years ago, but nobody the concern. So also the garages, the technicians, the GMs, they don't know about.
They don't understand the environment.
Yes. What is this? Just it's easy to throw away. But at 2022, as I remember, 2021 or so, there is the big fire at the Dangao, the dump area. So we don't know about the correct reason, but also the battery can the cause of fire.
Yeah.
Because of instead of status of the batteries, if there is the kind of pressure or the shock or the chemical the reactions with waters, it can cause this fire and explode it.
That is the same reason you would remember some specific companies' phones would catch fire in airplanes because of their pressure.
Yes, pressure. Yes. So, but the is more serious is the inside of batteries. There is have the lots of metal. But inside of batteries with the electrolyte is kind of the liquid the metals, and they can spill the inside of groundwater and cause underground water pollution. That is more serious. So that's why we suggest this project ideas to Korea governments, the specific to the KOICA. So they agrees to support our project. And this year we are planning to battery recycling the demonstration project. Yes, as the Simon mentioned it, we are under the EIA the process that is recommended by the MOE. But EIA now is finishes the first test audit and the site visitings audit, but still there is some specific no regulation because EIA auditing firm asked to us to getting to the patent for the recycle business purposes. But why we take a EIA audit to applying this project? So it's same as the chicken egg issue again.
I understand. I understand.
At the administration process.
But there are certain standards which are important, and particularly bodies like IFC have come out with guidelines called emission guidelines. And while there is a process of recycling, there is also, if not done properly, there is a side effect, that is polluting while you're trying to clear the environment. And that's probably why it would still be necessary for experts to look at it closely.
So yeah, so based on my ideas, whenever I meet the ministry officers, I bring up these ideas. They know this the battery recycle project idea needed for the Cambodia EV industry. But so yes, I'm Korean. I'm from Korea. Also, Korea is very strong for electric vehicle industry,
Correct.
and secondary the battery industry also. But Korea is the same also. We don't have the specific regulation for the waste batteries management.
Today, I would think it would, right? But
Why? Because to make a law and regulation take a long time. But the EV industries, you remember, just recall it, just less than 3 to 5 years industry is growing up rapidly and changing. So that's why now also the Korea's government's the battery cycle and EV industry treat as a sandbox. So I think you all understand about sandbox. So temporary exempt or suspended the existing the regulations for a certain period of time when the new technology or the new industry. So yes, before these sessions I talked with hers for the sandbox, any the cases in Cambodia or not. But also, I strongly hope to bring up the waste battery, the issues with the street and sandbox for the promoting the EV industry in Cambodia.
thanks a lot, Andy. And one particular thing which struck out is not just environmental. There are some immediate health concerns, which Andy touched upon, was with respect to metalloids, when these suspended metals seep into groundwater. And as most of the rural agrarian population of this country is relying on groundwater, there is obviously an immediate health risk and not just a long drawn environmental consideration, which will affect in the population in medium to long term. So that's an important aspect, and I believe your organization is at the same time looking at it closely, and there is some angle of batteries from Cambodia being recycled, because that's tying into your MOU to some extent between Cambodian and Korean government.
Yes, before that, yes, I just mentioned about the waste battery issues in aspect of the environmental aspect. Also, the other side is also the waste batteries recycling from the EV industry is important for the economic aspect. Because once we recycle, we can use some kind of this material as copper and aluminiums, and we can easily recycle
These two.
this the byproduct itself is easily. But is more important is this one, the black mass powder.
Rare earth minerals.
Yes, black mass powder. This is actually the compound of the rare metal, such as nickel, cobalt, manganese, and lithiums. So actually, the inside of battery, this is the with electrolyte is kind of liquid status. But during the battery recycling process, some kind of drying and other process, we can get it as kind of powder. So we are referring to getting the byproducts from the physical process in Cambodia, and we are referring to the export the black mass powder to Korea, to the value chain, the secondary batteries, and then over there, so through the chemical process, we can get 100% pure each material and refinery. So they can get in lithium, cobalt, nickel, manganese, 100% pure rare metal. And then we can re-input the battery manufacturing process. That is our project, the concept ideas. But also the other side, the economic aspect is important. This one, if we just throw away and landfill, just a waste of the resources.
Expensive resources, actually.
Yes, expensive resource, and also it's limited resources. But we can export to Korea, so we can use it and export to the other country from the Cambodia. This is kind of the urban mining's the business, the concept idea.
Correct. And that's the angle, right? So the point here is the mining of rare earth mineral to make them into rare earth metals is itself a very polluting process. And that is why it is important that we continue to, recycle. Now, with that, I would divert the discussion a bit to regulatory and go to Vatna for that to understand what do we need to look forward to, what is coming into the country. So my question to you would be, are there any upcoming regulatory changes that could impact recycling and disposal processes of EV batteries and similar scraps used in EVs? I would appreciate if you could give a bit of emphasis on the national policy on development of electric vehicles, which is poised to factor 2024-2030. Thank you.
Sure, Nishant, I will do that. So, Simon already mentioned that Cambodia has recently adopted the Environment Code in 2023, but the Environmental Code is very long and it will be supplemented by subsequent regulation, including the sub-decree and the PRACA. And just like Cecile had mentioned, that there are some standards, including ISC standard and ISO standard, in relation to the EV charger as well as the disposal of the EV battery. But what the government can see is that I think the government understands, just like what Andy has just mentioned, there is no common rule and standard for the EV waste management as yet. So one of the main objectives of the national policy on EV is to protect the environment, and the government has set its conflict plan to list down the upcoming regulatory change that they plan to do. The first one is in relation to the establishment of common rule and standard for EV waste management. Particularly, they will focus on the disposal of the EV battery, hazardous waste, and the waste that contain lithium, and the plan will be implemented up until 2026. So they set that target. The second point in the EV national policy is the establishment of infrastructure investment framework for the collection, the transportation, as well as the recycling of the EV battery. The third one is in relation to the promotion of recycling and the reuse of all kinds of EV waste. The fourth one is in relation to the setting up of the waste management and disposal mechanism of the used fuel vehicle. So not only EV, but they also focus on the used fuel vehicle by 2026 as well. And in terms of the investment incentive, there are some investment incentive in place already, but I understand that the regulation is not clear. So the government plan to review and further improve the policy to incentivize the electric vehicle waste processing plants in Cambodia. Last but not least, the government also focus on the research. So they will establish a mechanism to support research on the waste recycling technology by 2026.
That's a very important aspect. So, I mean, they are not just going to import an established process, but they're also looking forward to an R&D side of it. So something ingenious that comes out of it. And that's good to know. That's actually a very interesting angle, and good to know that government is not just focusing on importation of technologies, but also to develop something homegrown. Very good. And briefly, Daiber, let me come to you with respect to a form of compliances on documentation or other process which may be necessary to understand from a tax perspective, particularly around recycling of batteries and scraps.
Okay. So for recycling, there's no specific tax requirement or guidance. But for disposal, any disposal of goods would require certain documentation. And from the GDP's perspective, they would require the company to notify them within 10 working days from the intended date of disposal. And at the same time, they would ask some tax officers to witness the disposal occurring. So I think these are some of the points that need to be considered when disposing
Batteries.
batteries.
Understand. Thanks a lot, Diver. And this actually chimes into what I was going to talk to you, Simon, about. What are the environmental regulations which apply to disposal, not recycling, processes of EV batteries and similar scraps used in EVs? I mean, let's bear in mind, I mean, we have discussed how it's just being landfilled, but if it is to be done in a more compliant manner, in a more ethical manner, what are the processes around it?
Well, yeah, I'm not sure how much I can add to everything Cecile and Andy and Vatana have said. Vatana mentioned the code that has come in. It replaces the environmental protection law. The Prakasam has this waste management. It abrogates certain other laws specifically. The code is specific about lead acid batteries, dispose of those. Article 243, I don't want to get too much into article numbers, but that states you need a permit from the MOE for the collection, storage, transportation, disassembly, treatment and disposal of battery waste. And let's remember, this is only dealing with lead acid batteries. Article 248 mandates biannual reporting, management control of hazardous waste in relation to lead acid batteries. So I shan't bore the audience with the article numbers, but lead acid batteries are specifically legislated for at the moment. Otherwise, as Vatana mentioned, we're waiting for implementing regulations for a number of very important provisions of the code. And until those come in, as Andy alluded to, we're a little bit in limbo. When it comes to exporting waste, we've had clients, Singaporean clients who have looked into this. It's there's no specific legislation at the moment. It's up in the air. It's up in the air. We need legislation to come in, essentially.
I appreciate that. And again, I see that as an opportunity for investors because my belief is that the Cambodian government is very interested in this sector. Particularly of its benefits. I'm not just talking about recycling, but the whole ecosystem around market entry from an SKD, CKD perspective to charging stations to the recycling, which is now the new topic and probably the last leg of the entire circle of things. So this is something where something which is meaningful, something which the regulators can see the value in, would most likely be accepted. And that rounds up the entire process. I mean, if you look at very words, they, to an extent, complete the entire circle. Well, not the last recycling might not be here 100%, but it's actually part of the chain. So something like that is valuable. Something like that is beneficial. With that, we come to an end of our podcast.
If I may, I realize that there is something, because we're talking about an industry that is quite nascent, I think it's very important for any actor from private sector or else to join others. There is currently discussion around the creation of an association to facilitate discussion among members from the private sector so that it can further facilitate discussion with the government, because right now what has been happening is individual companies are going by themselves towards the
Ad hoc
government,
processes.
advocating for what they need. The idea right now, and it's currently under discussion, is to consolidate the voice of the private sector, to have an actor that can speak with the different entities from the government. And I think this is really important at this stage of the industry, to have this consolidation of the needs from the private sector at each and different stage of this value chain. So I thought this might be something interesting to mention for any actor coming into the country and not being aware of this. Right, it's still under consolidation, but I think soon it will be created, and probably during the event. And
As it would be with any new sector opening up, the holders and 360 consultation takes place, and good to know that there is a consolidation in process, and regulators will be considering that. With that, I would reiterate that there is an event which is going to happen at the end of September. Could you give the precise dates, Andy?
Oh, maybe almost end of the last week of September. That is organized by the Energy Lab. So yes, all the stakeholders related to the EV industry in Cambodia will join, and we will planning to take it some the test riding events from electric car, electric scooter, electric standing scooters, all the kind of type that is provided service in here. So the reason to the holding the e-mobility showcases is we really hope to expand the market and hope to change the Cambodians the negative awareness related to electric mobility. So this year the Energy Lab planning to host it at the Kopik area. There is more the big spaces, and so I hope the Cambodians join the electric mobility showcases, and hope to getting more positives feedback from the electric vehicle.
Thank you, Andy. And they're not our sponsors. So they're not sponsors of this podcast. So with this, actually, we come to an end of a very interesting series of discussions we have had throughout the entire supply chain, or rather, very interesting discussions we have had throughout the entire ecosystem and its status at present in Cambodian context. I take this opportunity to thank all the participants who have taken out time from their busy schedules and happily contributed on the deliberation as to how and where we stand and where we have to go. So with that, we come to an end of the 4 episodes series of podcast. And thank you for the audience for listening to us. And I hope you have had important things to take away from these discussions. Until next time, thank you.
Thank you.